Hi, my name is Marcel, also known as Chiquita, the animated skeptic. I say animated not because I'm particularly cheerful, but because I like animation a lot. But going to the subject of the video, which is exorcisms, are they real? Our purpose will be to make a dialogue and several questions from the information we can get from real exorcists and the Bible, trying to make a reasonable picture of how we could perceive this phenomena called possession. And the first video we are going to dive into this discussion will be the interview given by Father Vince Lampert to the YouTube channel Capturing Christianity, which is a very good channel in terms of the discussions they propose. I recommend visiting, and it will be in the video description below. So in the interview, Father Vince describes himself. He is a priest for more than 29 years now, and he has 15 years of experience with exorcism. His appointment as an exorcist led him to study for 3 years, if I'm not mistaken, in Rome. So it's all pretty official, as he says. A summary I could make of how he represents the exorcism taking place is as follows. First, most people that we have a suspicion of being possessed are actually not possessed. Something he says about in this book, that 1 in every 5,000 cases is a real possession. So this is cited in his book and in the interview as well. This is to emphasize that in order to give a picture of how careful they are in their claims about the existence of possession and demons. Second, they always make the potential cases of possession go through a medical triage in order to eliminate the possibility of other cases, or say natural causes. Usually these causes are either neurological or psychological in nature. So in the interview he cites 2 types of illness, schizophrenia and Tourette syndrome, although we are going to discuss further that are several other conditions that he doesn't cite. 3, he gives a series of symptoms that are used to recognize what is called a real possession. So foaming of the mouth, eyes, and so on, which will be the second book of our discussion, along with the medical triage. And fourth, Father Vince takes on a series of questions from the audience in the interview, from the YouTube channel Capturing Christianity. So the first thing we are going to discuss are the numbers given and the answer to the questions made in 1830, which is, how would you go about convincing someone that is skeptical of this whole thing? And his answer has a few layers. 2, in fact. He says it depends on the perspective of the person he's talking about. So if the person, he can be believing is seeing, or seeing is believing. So he made this dichotomy between 2 types of persons. And second, he says about the history of the church with 2,000 years of history against the forces of evil, and that evil is not simply a thing that people do against each other, but it is personified in the devil and his fallen angels. And also the evidence for this is in the Bible and in his ministry of exorcism that exists for such a long time in the history of the church. So to tackle this question and his answers, I won't in this case make some questions, because it is actually something that is considered to be common sense. This dichotomy made between believing is seeing versus seeing is believing, it is artificial and incorrect and equivocated, you could say. If you study just a little of epistemology and hermeneutics, and he certainly did that to become a priest, along with some information from neurology that everyone can get from the internet, you will know that everything we see it is an interpretation of the brain. So when I say see, I'm including not only what we see with our eyes, but also something in general, like everything we experience through the senses. It is an interpretation of the brain. To make a simple graphic of what happens when we interact with the environment, I will take this description of what we call spiral of hermeneutics. In this image, you can see so what happens with everything in life that we experience with our senses and what we read in case of interpretation. It is that we start here on the top already with our preconceptions, what we assume we are seeing, and what we experienced before we come across that thing that comes to our senses. So it also affects our familiarity with what we are seeing, or what we are experiencing. So let's take one example. So let's say you are a small child that never saw a bull or a cow in your life. So if you ever saw only humans and dogs in your whole life, if you have the capacity to understand the difference between separate beings like yourself and your parents and other people, you might start first in looking at the bull and think that it's actually a very strange dog at a distance. So you think, why does that dog has some things over his head, for instance? On a second moment, so going a little further in the graph, in the image, on a second moment, you might see that bull actually eats something different from dogs. So you see dogs eating normal food or rations, and you see a bull eating grass, and you think this is something different. Maybe it's something different. This thing that I'm seeing, you might think this is too big for a dog, or you might start thinking that this thing is similar to a dog in some sense, but is actually not a dog. So you change your perspective from a very strange dog to something that is similar to a dog, but not a dog. So in the third moment, here on the spiral, you ask to an adult to explain what are those animals. And they say there are cows and bulls, and they live grazing, and that they live grazing in that farm, and we actually we use them in our meals. So we use not only milk that comes from the cows, but also we eat the flesh of the bulls, for instance. And then when you receive that information, your picture changes completely from the first picture you had of what were those animals. So you see here that in this spiral of hermeneutics, what happens is that your perspective is challenged once and again. And when it is challenged, you change your perspective. And in this case of the child, it is particularly easy for the child to change its perspective, because a child is very open to changes of opinion, different from adults that already have more experience, have more interpretations about how the world is or how the world works. And a child is particularly easy for it to believe what adults say, especially its parents or other adults. Sometimes a child thinks that its parents are infallible, so that they never say anything that is a lie. So, which is actually something similar to what people think about the Bible. So they think that their parents are infallible. So this is something to consider. So this whole process, one way or another, happens to every person. This is not controversial. This is common sense. It's something that everyone that takes time for 2 minutes of reading and taking in the information they can get from the internet, they will know this. So there is no such dichotomy of every person that believes and then sees things or sees things and then come to the belief. It's obvious that if you have a certain belief, it is easier for you to accept certain claims than if you don't believe certain things to accept those same claims. I'm not saying that this doesn't happen, but to give another example, let's say a person believes in the miracles of the Bible or in miracles in general, and it doesn't follow that this person will believe in every single miracle associated with Christianity. Let me put this image here for you to understand. So let's say you are a so-called Orthodox Christian that believes in the Bible as to be the Word of God. So in this case, you believe in the salvation, heaven and hell, and the resurrection of Jesus, and also believe in the miracles done by Jesus and his disciples, described in the Bible, literally. One day, your neighbor says in a conversation that his son died in his house from a heart attack, and he was resurrected with a prayer done by the pastor of his church. What will be your first reaction when you hear this? Will you give his words the same credit as you do to the Bible? Or will you think differently in your process of thinking? That will depend on several things, but usually people will be much more suspicious of these accounts of miracles happening today than when you compare to the Bible. You might be interested, for example, in asking how much time was this child dead? Or how did he know that this child was dead in the first place? In another way, you would, for instance, be more convinced of this person being dead if he was declared dead by a doctor, not a layman that doesn't know any better. Or if the child was dead for a long period of time in a morgue, for example, 3 days, 7 days dead, and not mere seconds. That is something natural to happen, and the person gets resuscitated by CPR, for instance. You can even be skeptical because you know there are natural conditions that people appear to be dead when they actually are alive, but in a different state of metabolism. So this part is actually not a discussion, but I put forward some questions here. For instance, if you heard someone say about a miracle today, would you have the same perspective as you have about the miracles in the Bible? Or the things that are described in the Bible were described today, would you have the same measure of criticism or questions? So this is a question you might be asking about this discussion we had today. As for the history of 2000 history of the church and so on, I will be talking about that in another video in another section. In the second video, we are going to be talking about the other questions made in the interview, and we'll be focusing on the medical triage that is made to consider someone possessed or not. And to end here, I will say my motto that don't accept things as they appear to be, and always ask questions.